Okay. So I have had the opportunity to listen to Donovan about 3 times, and each time I'm just floored by how much information and how well it is presented so that even I could understand it. And I think tonight you will find the same thing. And I thank Donovan so much for taking this kuleana seriously and educating us all.
Aloha mai kākou. First off, mahalo for having me. Thank you, Claire, for bringing me down, and everyone else who is involved. For me, I don't like to self-promote, so I don't go out there, hey, you want a presentation? Hey, you want a presentation? But for me, I understand this to be my kuleana, so anytime any community group wants a presentation, if community is me and 1 person, if it's me and 2 people, if it's me and 10 people, if it's me in a room full of people, I'm willing to give this presentation to anyone, anywhere. It's very helpful that I was flown down to Maui, so I didn't have to out of pocket. But other than that, I don't tell my wife, but other than that, I don't require any other compensation or any other things. She'll be like, stop being an academic, we have to feed our child, but this is my kuleana, yeah? So, with that said, I don't give out my PowerPoints, but very shortly, I'll have these presentations up on a website, greatmahele.org. Greatmahele.org. Right now, if you go there, it just says, this will be the future home of a conversation on private property. That greatmahele.org is going to be run by me, made by me, and only me. And I'll have videos of this presentation with me representing on video for those of you who need something to do on a Friday night and tweak out. Yeah. Today I'm going to talk about the Crown Lands, the King's Lands. I was in Lahaina yesterday. Some of you may or may not have been there, but I gave a different presentation there. Many of the slides will be similar or the same. Yesterday was kind of the overview. Today we're narrowing in on a specific topic, just the Crown Lands. This isn't a Mahele conversation. This is kind of more specific to the Crown Lands. Prior to the Crown Lands being the Crown Lands, they were the Kings, known as the King's Lands, and we'll go over those kinds of things. But a general sentiment about the Mahele. The Mahele is, in my opinion, the most misunderstood thing here in Hawaii today. You would be surprised. It doesn't make sense that the state of Hawaii and the lawyers in the state of Hawaii and the Hawaiians and everyone doesn't understand the Mahele. How can we not understand this thing? It happened 100 years ago. It's private property. What do you mean we don't understand this thing? But things as simple as definitions. Definitions that are in templates, we do not understand. Definitions that are in templates, Chinen says something about them that only adds more confusion. Yeah? Unfortunately, the best way and the only way to understand the Mahele properly is to read all of the primary source documents. You need to read tens of thousands of those documents to do that. Only recently are these documents available online. If you have to read, who in this room has read more than 100 Land Commission awards? Right? There's 10,000. Anyone read all 10,000? Right? So if there's no one in this room that's read all 10,000, how do we know what Land Commission awards are? If we haven't read all of them, right? So that's just one example because that's just Land Commission awards. You still have royal patents on Land Commission. You still have royal patent grants. You still have the Mahele book, right? How many of you have read the entire Mahele book? How many of you have transcribed the Mahele book? Right? So all of these kinds of things, yeah? Just so you know where my foundation comes from, I've read the Mahele book, I've transcribed the Mahele book, I've transcribed the Index of Land Commission Awards, I've transcribed the Index of Royal Patent Grants. I was on a project where we transcribed every single Land Commission Award. Right? So that's my foundation that doesn't get put up on here. That's how I know what I know. That's how I know how difficult it is to know what I know. Because I had to do all of those things to come to this understanding. Because it's not in Chinen. It's not in any secondary source. And I can't point you to a book to say, hey, go look at this book and you'll get it. I can point you to 50,000 documents. Anyone want to read 50,000 pages? Right? But it's important to understand that context so that when I'm up here, hey, who's that guy saying, oh, he's the only one in the world who understands the Mahele? I'm not saying that, I'm just saying I've read more than most people, right? And that's the foundation, and it's important for you to know what that foundation is when doing these things. Okay? The number one question to keep in mind when talking about the Crown lands is this question on the board. Are the Crown lands private or government property?
Private.
Right? But that's where the narrative gets shifted. We know they're private, but how then do you take private property and make it public? Right? And that's what happens, and that's where you need to understand and not ever lose focus on this. Because when you own this, and then at the end of the conversation we're talking about this, where did this go? How are we only talking about use of the proceeds? Right? The whole bundle of sticks, all bundles of sticks belong to the king. How are we only talking about the right to use of the proceeds from the crown lands? Right? And that will also, this question will also help us to inform questions we may have today. Yeah? For me, I try to come from a place where I want to understand the crown lands in the context of the Hawaiian Kingdom era. Right? There's a difference between understanding the Crown lands in the context of the Hawaiian Kingdom era and understanding the Crown lands in a context of how do we make amends for a historical injustice. When you're trying to make amends for a historical injustice, you may interpret things differently than if you try to understand what were the Crown lands in the Hawaiian Kingdom. Yeah? The day before the overthrow, what were the Crown lands? 1870, what were the Crown lands? Yeah? And we'll explore that potentially later. Quick overview. What does Mahele mean? I know at least some of you were in yesterday's presentation. One definition. Mahele means to divide. What's being divided? Land. The common answer is land. The perspective I take on the Mahele is that the Mahele was a division of rights in land. If you're looking at the Mahele as a division of land, you're putting the cart before the horse. Right? We divided rights in land. As a result of dividing rights in land, people got land. Right? The land is the end result. The rights, division of rights, is the process. We understand the results, or we think we understand the results. What we don't understand is the process. Yeah? Who has rights in land?
People have the right in the land.
Makainana, the sovereign, the government, the chiefs, right? The triangle, the structure, the mo'i, the ali'i, makainana. Traditional times, all of those guys had rights in land, proportionally different, right? The mo'i had right to everything, the makainana had rights to their house lots and smaller lands. The 1840 Constitution is the source of the Mahele. In the 1840 Constitution, we start to bring what was Hawaiian custom and we start to codify it into constitutional law. This happens because Kamehameha III was in charge of this country. In 1843, 3 years after this constitution, Kauikeoli, Kamehameha III, becomes the king of an independent country. If there's a United Nations in 1843, Hawaii has a seat at the table. Yeah? 1840, Hawaiian custom gets codified into constitutional and later statutory law. That is huge. Most other indigenous peoples today are trying to get their customs acknowledged in a court today. We don't have to get custom acknowledged because they codified it for us in 1840. Problem is they overthrew that government that recognized this in 1893. That's where we see the reality with land we see today. My contention for the Mahele is that it was not the Mahele which created the reality we see today. It wasn't the creation of private property, it was the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. If that government wasn't overthrown, the reality we see today with land would have been very different. For 50 years, 1843 to 1893, we're walking this way. 1893 happens, we start walking this way. And we've been walking this way for 120 something years, so we are that far away from that interpretation. That's why today's reality, hey, I see what how my ancestors looked at the land. Very different than how we interact with the land today. Why is that? Because there was an overthrow which shifted the perspective. Yeah? But that was yesterday's talk. Today we're going to talk about the Crown Lands. 1840 Constitution. The origin of the present government and system of polity is as follows. Kamehameha I was the founder of the kingdom, and to him belonged all the land. Land, layers. Right? Land has multiple meanings depending on the context you're talking. Land, sovereignty of a country. Land, real estate. In this context, land, and to him belonged all the land from one end of the islands to the other, we're talking sovereignty. Kana'iaupuni, conqueror. He threaded all of the islands together. The 4 island kingdoms get threaded. Unification, all of that. That's what that's talking about. Though it was not his own private property, it belonged to the chiefs and people in common, of whom Kamehameha I was the head and had the management of. Now we're talking real property. Right? You look at these two things. It all belonged to him, though it wasn't his. If we're talking about the same thing, if land means the same thing in both sentences, we're confused. It all belonged to him, but it wasn't his. No, the sovereignty all belonged to him. Nobody's going to say he's not Kana'iaupuni. The real estate did not belong to him. Right? Land, sovereignty of a country, land, real estate. Real estate belongs to, it was not his own private property, it belonged to the chiefs and people in common. This is where Hawaii is unique. This is nothing like American property law. Other monarchies, when the king created private property, when the king created land for the first time, he's not acknowledging the commoners. He's not acknowledging his people having ownership in the land. I'm the king, it belongs to me, come buy it from me. Kamehameha III, we all own it collectively, although my share is proportionally larger than your share is proportionally larger than an ali'i, whose share is larger than a maka'ainana. In the same way it was in Kalai'aina. You didn't have maka'ainana getting entire ahupua'a, getting entire mokus, right? That was the chiefly class ali'i ai moku, ali'i ai ahupua'a. And then they divided it smaller up amongst the maka'ainana, who got their lands. 1846 Principles of the Land Commission become statutory law, statutes, law, right? Law passed through statute. It being therefore fully established that there are but 3 classes of persons having vested rights in the land. First, the government, second, the landlord, third, the native tenant. It next becomes necessary to ascertain the proportional rights of each. Though it was not his own representative of government, it belonged to the chiefs, the landlords, the people in common, the native tenants. So here we get this constitutional broad. What does that mean? All the land, we all own the land, get refined. There are but 3 classes of persons having vested rights in the land. First, the government, second, the chiefs, third, the native tenants. That means the native tenants held an undivided interest in all of the land. Native tenants own the land. If you're familiar with the bundle of stick metaphor, you are part owner in every single bundle of stick from the beginning. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah? Without that, we're not talking about kuleana lands, we're not talking about anything else. You have kuleana lands because of this. Kuleana lands are the result of dividing the tenant's interest in the overall ownership. That's why you get free kuleana lands, that you only have to pay the survey and only have to pay these other things, because you were acknowledged to have had interest in the land from the beginning. Kaikendo talks about this. We find in 1840 the first admission by the king and chiefs that the common people had an actual ownership interest as distinguished from a mere right of use in the lands of the kingdom. I've read Kaikendo dozens of times. This did not pop off the page from me until last month. I only got this quote last month. You can read and reread and I reread the same things over and over, and I pick up something new every single time. Right? That's the nature of the beast. If your brain's not ready, if you haven't made the connections in your brain yet that are ready to make the connection and see that that sentence is important, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this just proves this. Thank you. Now it's not me saying it. Now I can cite Kuykendall, blame him. Right? The common people had an actual ownership as distinguished from a mere right of use. We had an actual ownership in the entire bundle, not just one stick. Huge. There are but three classes having rights in land. First the government, second the chiefs, third the native tenants. How do we know? Because that one guy presenting in Maui, he told me.
That's right.
That's the last thing I want anyone in this room to say. Yeah? None of this should be because, oh, Donovan said. All the documents are in front of us. It's not I said. This is 1840 Constitution, 1846 Principles of the Land Commission said. Right? I'm just the mailman delivering the mail. The mail says we were ownership. We had ownership. Don't blame me if you don't like what the letter says. You don't like it, go find a different letter that says otherwise. And I'll read it and I'll see how it fits. 1840, we moved from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. Kauai does this voluntarily. I do not know of any other country, but there are a few, but very few, that the king went from an absolute monarch to a constitutional monarch voluntarily. You run all of Hawaii. Tomorrow you say, you know what? I don't like all this power, I'm going to spread it out. That's what Kamehameha III did voluntarily. Other countries go from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy, revolution. This tyrant monarch, I don't like what he's doing, off with his head. Right? That's where the guillotine is invented. France, guillotine, off with the king's head. He's not taking care of the people, we need a new form of government. Revolution. That does not happen in Hawaii. 1840, Kamehameha III on his own divests his power and spreads it out amongst the people. Now you get the executive, now you get the legislative, now you get the judicial. Now for the first time, you got the legislative branch, and now for the first time in Hawaiian history, Maka'inana have a say in the creation of laws. Never before in our history did the Maka'inana have a say in the creation of laws. All the laws were what this chief said, or whoever your chief was at the time. Chiefly law, whatever he said, that's law, that goes. Right? He asked, hey, what you guys thinking? But we never came and said, hey, I think we should have this law. Okay. Right? 1840, we start that with the beginning of the constitutional period. This was the beginning of a government as contradistinguished from the person of the king, who was thenceforth to be regarded rather as the executive chief and political head of the nation than its absolute governor. Certain kinds of public property began to be recognized as government property and not the king's. Now, for the first time, we have the concept of government that is separate from the person of the king. Before 1840, the king, his government, is absolute everything. After 1840, you now have government, conceptually, because now you got some proceeds and some things going to function government, and now you have king, who's also the highest ranking chief. Right? So you get this split. Before 1840, you do not have the concept of government that's separate from the person. After 1840, you do. And this is the important part when we're starting to talk about crown lands. But the political changes introduced at that period did not affect in the least the king's right as a great feudal chief or suzerain of the kingdom. Right? So the division of the political powers into the executive, legislative, and judicial, he started to divest those powers, but he was still absolute owner of all of the land. Right? In the 1840s, he confiscates all the fisheries. Says, hey, all the fisheries are mine, and redistributes them. You can only do that if you are
Sorry.
mo'i, if everything belongs to you. Right? Great Mahele happens in 1848. Why was it needed? Now, the perspective we often hear is, well, the missionaries wanted this. That we hear the story of what happened to us. Nobody ever asks, hey, why did Kamehameha III want this? What was he thinking? Put yourself in the place of the king's shoes. What is he thinking? Hey, why is this private property thing such a good idea? Why should I do this? Why should I not do this? King's purpose and intent.
See, there was one that so you codified it.
Public domain, confiscation, free from the burden of being considered public domain. The records of discussion in council show plainly His Majesty's anxious desire to free his lands from the burden of being considered public domain, and as such subjected to the danger of confiscation in the event of his islands being seized by any foreign power. Important words. Free from the burden of being considered public domain, confiscation through the seizure by any foreign power. In 1839, you have the French come in. Laplace comes in and demands $20,000 from Kamehameha because he's persecuting the Catholics, right? Catholicism outlawed. Catholics get put in jail, get kicked out. Laplace comes and says, points his ship, says, you got to remedy this. Threat to Hawaiian sovereignty. At that time, in 1839, had Laplace came and took over Hawaii, all 4 million acres of Hawaii would have went to France because all 4 million acres of Hawaii was considered public domain. In the event of imperial conquest, all public property goes to the conqueror. The only lands that are respected are private property. If nothing is in private property, everything goes to the conquering country. 1840, New Zealand, colonized by the British. Tahiti, colonized by France. New Caledonia, all of these messages are getting back to the king. 1843, Paulette lowers the Hawaiian flag, puts up the British flag. Right? La Ho'iho'ea, the day sovereignty was returned. Admiral Thomas comes back, says, no, that's not what's going on here. Puts the Hawaiian flag back up. Had any of those events actually occurred, all 4 million acres would have belonged to the imposing country. Yeah. Kamehameha knows this. So at this time, what would you say is the intention? To make the king's lands private or public?
Private.
Private, right?
All of it.
His intent. And it's not only his lands. Right? This isn't the greedy king trying to look out for his stuff. Any land that is in private property gets respected. So if all of you have land in private property, all of you are secure, and you don't have to go to the French king and say, hey, King Louis Philippe, can I please have some land here in Hawaii that once used to belong to us? Now I got to ask the Frenchman. Here are the authorities cited in Privy Council. Discussion of Privy Council, they have all of these books. All of these books they're talking about. Elements of international law, American diplomatic code, principles of nature, commentaries on the laws of England, commentaries on American law, commentaries on the Constitution of the United States, the spirit of laws translated from the French. Right? All of this, they're getting these sources. Hey, what's the rest of the world? How are they operating? They get these books, they read them. One of these books says, James Kent, Commentaries on American Law. The general usage now is not to touch private property upon land without making compensation. This is how they know that private property is respected, because in all of these books, it's talking about how private property is respected in the event of imperial conquest. Kamehameha III has a discussion in Privy Council, December 18th, 1847. If a foreign power should take the islands, what lands would they respect? Mr. Lee, William Little Lee, gave it as his opinion, except in the case of resistance to and conquest by any foreign power, the king's right to his private lands would be respected. The king said, unless it were so, he would prefer having no lands whatsoever. But he asked, during the French Revolution, were the king's lands not confiscated? William Little Lee responds, yes, they were, but that was from an internal revolution, not from an imperial conquest. It was the French Revolution, that was an internal revolution. And the internal revolution led to the confiscation of the king's lands. The king observed that he would prefer that his private lands should be registered not in a separate book, but in the same book as all other allodial titles, and that the only separate book should be that of the government lands. He's trying to create a distinction. Put my lands in with all of the rest of the private property, and the only separate book, make that the government book. Private, government, clear distinction. This stuff is preserved, that stuff, I don't want to say available, but that would be the available stuff for the imperial conquest, right? What's Kamehameha III's intent?
Private law.
Private, right? January 27th through March 7th, 1848, we get the Great Mahele, the Great Division. When Kauikeoli participates in the Mahele of 1848, he's participating as the highest ranking chief. He is not participating as representative of government. The Mahele of 1848 is a division between all the chiefs. Divides out the undivided interests of the chiefly class. There are but three classes of persons having rights in land. First, the government. Second, the chiefs. The Mahele of 1848 divides out the previously undivided interests of the chiefs. The day, this is January 27th to March. This results in the Mahele book. If you Google Department of Accounting and General Services Mahele book, that will take you to the Hawaii State Archives webpage and will give you a PDF, clean PDF version that is legible and readable, and you can have a copy of the Mahele book and see every single page what happens. Left side of the page, Ko Kamehameha III, right side of the page, one of the 252 chiefs who participate in the Mahele. Now, aina, whether it's in Ahupua or at Ilikupono, Kalana, Moku, the district and the island it's on, Na'aina, Ahupua, district, island. List of place names, list of place names. Keaya kuneo I kea Mahele o mai kai. I hereby agree to this division, it is satisfactory. The lands above inscribed are the king's, I have no right to them. I hereby agree to this division, it is satisfactory. The lands above inscribed are Kamamalu's. She has permission to take them before the land commission. So all the 252 chiefs say, this page is mine, that page is yours, you don't have rights in mine, I don't have rights in yours. None of the other 250 chiefs have rights in any of this. Undivided interests of the chiefs divided up.
Sorry to interrupt. Can
No.
you give that to me again? How you Google it?
Department of Accounting and General Services, Mahele book. And that'll take you, it's the Hawaii State Archives, but if you just put State Archives Mahele book, it doesn't take you straight there.
Okay, thank you.
The DAG search will. The day after the Mahele, Kauikeoli, so the 252 chiefs get 1.5 million acres, Kauikeoli gets 2.5 million acres. This land still subject to the rights of government, still subject to the rights of native tenants. This land still subject to the rights of government, still subject to the rights of native tenants. The further explanation of that story was yesterday's presentation. Today we're just going to focus in on this. Kauikeoli takes his 2.5 million acres, divides it between himself, the government, himself, the highest ranking chief. The lands he keeps for himself become known as the king's land. He signs two instruments on March 8th. Instrument number 1, for me and my heirs and successors forever. Instrument number 2, I do hereby give, make over, and set apart forever to the chiefs and people of my kingdom and convey all my right, title, and interest in the lands situated here in the Hawaiian Islands, inscribed on these pages, to have and to hold to my chiefs and people forever. Instrument number 1 creates the king's lands. Instrument number 2 creates the government lands. Is king's lands public or private?
Private.
If the government lands and the king's lands are all the same thing, why are you making 2 separate instruments?
Just in case.
Right? Why do we got instrument number 1 and instrument number 2 if this is all the White House?
One's the proclamation, the other one's a...
Right? He's separating. This is the private, this is the government. Instrument number 1, king's lands. Instrument number 2, government lands. Right? Again, private. Everything we've seen so far, private, private, private. King's lands, private. This results in the king receiving about 1 million acres of land and the government getting 1.5 million acres of land. This is our king's land. After 1865 becomes known as the Crown Lands. We'll get to that later. But I like to refer to these things in their proper historical context. If you're talking about the Crown Lands in 1848, the Crown Lands didn't exist in 1848. The Crown Lands weren't created until after 1865. Before 1865, they were known as the King's Lands. And we'll get into the events that talk about that. Thank you. I'm still getting there. Thank you. Questions? Our Konahiki lands here, these are our Ali'i Trust, Kamehameha Schools, QLCC, Lunalilo. These are all the Konahiki lands here. I don't know if it's most, but many of your Maui ranches also bought auupua and large amounts of land from the Konahikis here. A lot of these Konahikis died without heirs, ended up selling to the ranches in the 1870s, 1860s, 1850s. One of the misnomers about the Mahele is that the Mahele benefited sugar. Sugar was leasing land from here, not buying land in fee simple. They don't start, sugar does not acquire the land that they own today until approximately post-overthrow, post-1900. Questions?
Women own land.
Victoria Kamamalu was the largest, got 14 pages of lands. But Makainana,
Was it recorded in the name, women who own land? All I ever saw was that a kid had most of the names. And then I'm kind of own land, women own land.
Makainana specifically, because Ali'i women did. Yeah? Victoria Kamamalu has 14 pages of land. She's the largest land. Women were the largest landowner in the Mahele. Victoria Kamamalu got more land than anyone else in the Mahele, right? Wahine. In 1864, we have the death of Kamehameha IV, Alexander Liholiho. Alexander Liholiho dies without a will, right? Alexander and Queen Emma have a son, Prince Albert. Prince Albert dies 2 months later, stricken with grief. Alexander Liholiho dies. Alexander Liholiho dies without an heir. Him dying without an heir leaves us with a court case in the matter of the estate of Kamehameha IV, 1864. In 1864, you have Lot Kapuaiva on one side, and you have Lot Kapuaiva, Kamehameha V, Alexander Liholiho's brother, and you have Queen Emma, the widow to Alexander Liholiho on the other side. Kamehameha V's claim. Kamehameha V claims that the crown lands were an appanage to the crown. They're attached to, they're connected to. Yeah? That it's the royal domain annexed, connected to the Hawaiian crown. Basically making the argument that the crown lands are government property. If government property, the crown lands therefore not subject to dower, not subject to inheritance law. Right? Kamehameha IV dies without a will. No will, you go to inheritance law for private property. Right? So Kamehameha V claims connected to the crown, therefore no dower, no inheritance law. This is the White House. Right? Queen Emma claims crown lands, private property. As private property, it's distributable under the statute regulating the descent of property, generally like all other private estates. If it's private property, therefore subject to dower, subject to inheritance law. Summarizing, Kamehameha V, government property, not subject to these two things. Private property, therefore subject to these two things. Right? So these are the two issues in this case. Inheritance and dower. And these two things are regulated by, is this government property or private property? If it's government property, we don't have, the government is the inheritor. We're not sitting here talking about who's the heir, who's the mother, father. Dower doesn't apply to government property, does apply to private property. So what? June 7th, 1848, there was an act that expressing our deepest thanks to His Majesty for this noble and truly royal gift, we do hereby solemnly confirm that this great act of our good King and declare the following named lands, here follow the names, to be the private lands of His Majesty Kamehameha III, to have and to hold himself, his heirs and successors forever, and said land shall be regulated and disposed of according to his royal will and pleasure, subject only to the rights of tenants. So what's the legislature's perspective on this? Private, government? Private, right? Have we seen any evidence so far of anyone saying these are government?
Except for his claim.
Yeah, except for Lot's claim, right? So to this point, all the evidence presented, private. Right? So when looking at the crown lands, between 1846 and 1865, you have approximately 100,000 acres of crown lands sold. These crown lands are sold and are titled Kamehameha deeds. The sales of these lands were filed in the Bureau of Conveyance. The Bureau of Conveyance is where all land titles by private individuals file their land titles. Today, you go buy a house, you're filing it at the Bureau of Conveyance, same bureau. Yeah? So is that evidence of private or public? Private. Private individuals file their claims at the Bureau of Conveyance. Right? Not government entities. Government entities sell their land through deeds that are titled royal patent grants. So if this were government land, all other government land during this same period was sold through templates that are called royal patent grants. Royal patent grants are the fee simple sale of government lands.
There's no fee simple.
Fee simple, but
There's no fee simple.
it's fee simple, but we'll save that for the end. We can show that at the end. Yeah? So royal patent grants, fee simple sale of government lands. Kamehameha deeds, fee simple sale of the crown lands. Here you see another separation. And he's also filing it in the same place that other private individuals filed. After 1865, slightly jumping a step because we're talking about 1864, we haven't finished the court case yet, but I'm going to jump ahead to introduce 1865. In 1865, Lot Capuaiva goes to the legislature and says, hey, can you guys please make these lands inalienable, not available for sale, because if this trend continues, eventually it's going to be all purple and there's going to be no lands left for the crown. So in 1865, a statute is passed making the crown lands inalienable. Inalienable, cannot sell, or transfer. So between 1865 and 1893, you get the Crown Land Commission, which is administering leases for the crown lands. All of these crown lands between 1865 and 1895 eventually become leased by Sugar. Sugar is leasing 900,000 acres of crown lands. If you would like a book and a source to go and look at, Horowitz, Horowitz, in 1965, the Hawaii Legislative Reference Bureau puts out a report on all public lands. In that report on public lands, it gives an accounting of public lands all the way down through the crown. In that, it talks about how Sugar is leasing all of these lands. Sugar's not buying here because if I buy 100,000 acres of land and the transportation's not right, the water's not right, the sun's not right, the soil's not right, there's no other game in town to purchase. Also, then I got to put all my capital into buying the land when I could have just paid you 1/50th of that, 1/100th of that every month, right? Much harder to come up with $1 million for a house today than to pay a monthly payment, right? And same thing for Sugar. Sugar's leasing. All of this sale, these large sales, that's ranches. So we just talked about Kamehameha III selling these lands as Kamehameha deed. Kamehameha III died with a will. In his will, he acknowledged Queen Kalama's right to dower. We'll go over dower in a second for those not familiar. Kamehameha IV also acknowledged Kalama's right to dower and ended up paying her something like $6,000 in lieu of dower to get rid of her interest in the crown lands. So we have Kamehameha III and IV both acknowledging dower. Kamehameha III for his wife, Kamehameha IV for Kalama. Kamehameha IV also sold these lands as Kamehameha deeds, sold them as his own private property. All profits, rents, and proceeds go to him, the person, not to the government treasury. Queen Emma, when Kamehameha IV sold each of these lands, Queen Emma signed off on each and every deed, relinquishing her right to dower. So here you have Kamehameha III, IV, and Queen Emma all acting as if this is private property. If this is government property, there is no dower to sign for Queen Emma. Now, if this is government property, these are being sold as royal patent grants, not as Kamehameha deeds filed in the Bureau of Conveyance. Questions before we move on? Public or private? Private. Everything so far is private. Inheritance laws in the kingdom, Civil Code, Chapter 32, Section 1447. Whenever any person, remember I told you how many tens of thousands of pages of primary source document you have to read? Civil Code, Chapter 32. Whenever any person shall die intestate within this kingdom, his property, both real and personal, of every kind and description, shall descend to and be divided among his heirs as hereinafter prescribed. Next section, 1448. First, it will go to the intestate's children, the issue of any of the deceased child. If no children, then it shall go to all his other lineal descendants, his children's children. So if you had one child, and that child had children, let's keep it easy. You have a child, another child, this guy dies. Section 2, if no children, then to all his other lineal descendants. His child gets land because his father is a placeholder for his right. If you have this person dies, 2 children, alive and alive, 2 children, split equally. This guy has 2 children, alive, dead, but this guy had 2 children before he died. These 2 children share in his half share that he's entitled to. Half, quarter, quarter. Because they inherit through this position that their parent holds. Yeah? That's what this is saying. Intestate children, if you don't have children, then your children's children. If the same degree, then they get it equally. Otherwise, per stirps. This guy died, his 2 children, quarter, quarter, half. Because these guys got to split this half. If it's third, then one third of a half, a sixth, a sixth, a sixth, half. Right? So you see how you've got to keep track of the genealogies. If no children, if your children didn't have children, then half to the widow, half to the father and mother. Right? First 2 examples, you don't see wife. You don't see lateral. Right? We're all going up and down. Wife shows up for the first time here. If no children, half to the widow, half to his mother and father. Yeah. Very different than today. You cannot bring today's inheritance laws into the kingdom. Yeah? Very, very different. If no issue, no children, no widow, then the whole shall descend to his father and mother, or to either of them if only one be alive. Right? So you can clearly see inheritance is in this direction, not this direction. Yeah? You're either going down to your children or you're going back up to your father or mother. If no issue, nor no father or mother, then half to the widow and half to the brothers and sisters and to any children of the deceased brother or sister. So if this guy dies and there's no children and no father or mother, then the widow still only gets half, but it now goes to the guy's brothers and sisters, or the children of the brothers and sisters. Still not to 100% of the widow. Right? Dower. Whenever a wife married into whenever a wife got married, she gave up her civil liberties and joined in a union with the husband under Hawaiian Kingdom law. As such, the woman gave up her certain portion of her rights, but she also gave up her responsibilities. The husband was liable for any civil things that his wife. So the wife doesn't have rights, but she also doesn't have responsibilities. If this wife goes out and does something, husband's liable. Right? So women don't have the rights, but women also don't have the responsibilities. Yeah? But that's a whole other issue, but that's...
So what year is that quoted from?
This is the civil code.
The same civil code.
Same civil code. The wife shall, in virtue of her marriage, be entitled in law to receive upon the death of her husband, by way of dower, a life estate in 1/3 part of all immovable and fixed property. Dower is the floor. You can get nothing less than 1/3 life estate. You're not thrown out with nothing. You don't inherit, but you're taken care of for your life in the sense of a life estate in 1/3 of all immovable and fixed property. Yeah? So that was what made sure the wife was taken care of, dower. At the very minimum, you get 1/3 life estate. While you're alive, you get a life estate in 1/3 of all immovable and fixed property. So this is what Kamehameha III and Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma were acknowledging. Queen Emma was signing off every single deed. If Queen Emma did not sign off on a deed, then she could have claimed dower in that land that her husband sold that she did not sign off on. Which is why it was important to get her signature at the time. Otherwise, she could have claimed, after her husband's death, dower in that land that was sold X years earlier. if she had not signed. What are the ramifications of all of this? Kamehameha V's claim that it's government property of the Hawaiian Kingdom, therefore, not subject to inheritance laws, not subject to dower. Queen Emma, private property, subject to inheritance laws, subject to dower. What are the pluses and minuses of each? Kamehameha V, if he's right, the successors to the crown inherit all of the crown lands. If he's right, then now all of a sudden what everything to date, Kauikeoli's own words, purpose, and intent, has now been transformed to government. When he was talking the whole time, the whole reason we're doing this is so that my private lands will be respected, because if these lands are considered government, they can be confiscated in the event of imperial conflicts. Right? So now we have a flip, now we have a huli, now we have Kamehameha III's purpose and intent is no longer being honored. Right? There was a reason I was making you say private 18 times, so that by the time you got here, you, oh wow, that's not right. Everything, the legislature and everyone to this point has said this is private. If Queen Emma is right, then private property respected. But nothing is left for the successors to the crown. Why?
Not there.
Inheritance laws say to your children, to your children's children, half to the widow, half to the father. Who's the widow? If Emma's correct, she inherits half of the crown lands and Kekuanao inherits the other half. And now all 1 million acres of the Kamehameha line's property is out of the Kamehameha line. Just because Kamehameha IV didn't make a will. If he made a will, no problem. Will it to whoever the inheritor is. No will, now all of a sudden the crown lands could be outside of the Kamehameha line. Questions?
Those lands were already privatized in 1848. It was handed over to the Konehikis by Kamehameha III. That states in page 17 of Chin's book on a judicial review.
Yeah,
And I was to
the
make sure
Konehikis are that other section. We're talking about...
To make sure that so it wouldn't be taken as spoils of war or unlawful taking. It was secured. So Act 1742 states that the government needs to check with the Konehiki before they make any deals. There was no land to be sold.
We can answer those questions after. Let me finish with this. Yeah? What was GM Robertson's decision at this time? Yeah? This is his decision. Under that act, the lands descend in fee, the inheritance being limited, however, to the successors to the throne. And each successive possessor may regulate and dispose of the same according to his will and pleasure as private property, in like manner as was done by Kamehameha III. How do you interpret this? Private or public? Private. As private property, right? So here we have private property with a limitation on inheritance. Yeah? Private property, fee simple absolute, refers to no conditions, no limitations. The most amount of rights and bundles of sticks, you have them all, fee simple absolute. Any limitation on anything makes it smaller or less than a fee simple absolute. A fee simple conditional. Yeah? There's fee simple condition precedent. You have fee simple absolute, the most you can, everything else is narrowing, smaller, smaller, smaller. An example of a limitation on inheritance is a fee tail. Fee tail doesn't exist in American property law. Yeah, most states have outlawed fee tails. Fee tail comes from Britain and British common law, where inheritance was limited to the eldest son. right? So it's not the second son, it's not the first daughter, it's eldest son inheritance. Yeah? That limitation on inheritance takes that one bundle of stick and makes it a little bit shorter. Because you've just taken a limitation and added it to it, so you don't have the full stick, now you have a limitation on that stick, which is inheritance. That's what this is. Private property with a limitation on inheritance. As such, Kamehameha V's claim, no, it's not government property. It's not subject to inheritance laws. Why? Because inheritance is limited to successors to the crown. Still subject to dower, because all private property is subject to dower. Kamehameha III acknowledged dower, Kamehameha IV acknowledged dower, Queen Emma acknowledged dower. In my opinion, Judge G.M. Robertson acknowledged all of the pluses and none of the minuses. Right? It's not government property, so it's consistent with Kamehameha III's intent. The successors still inherit, so to my heirs and successors forever, it's still going to his successors to the office of the crown. It's still private property, still gets inherited by successors to the crown, still acknowledging dower, which Kamehameha III and IV and Queen Emma all did. For me, Judge Robertson's interpretation, pono with everything, with the purpose and intent of everything that came before it, to this point. Questions?
So Robertson wasn't a judge?
Robertson, G.M. Robertson was not a trained lawyer, but became a Hawaii Supreme Court judge. He's in every single regard to the estate of, he's also on the Land Commission, he's in every single important court case of this time, he's the judge. When I read his decisions, I think he gets it. He understands the context of the time and applies what I would say is the pono decision. G.M. Robertson has a son. His son is a judge during the overthrow era. I don't know that his son is like his father. And that's where you see, if you want to do an interesting research project, go do the genealogies on all of the judges. To today. Judge King, there's another Judge King. And all of these guys are in post-overthrow. But that's why I'm trying to say, don't throw G.M. Robertson into his son's. There is a difference there. I don't know if there's a difference between the kings. I haven't studied their court cases. I have read Robertson's. This Robertson, pono. The other Robertson, I'm not so sure.
What was his initials?
I forget the second initial. Something like that. But he's post-overthrow. In 1893, land and politics, land and sovereignty get intermeshed. Yeah? And whenever people say, hey, Hawaiians, get over it. Hey, Hawaiians, you guys got to separate land and politics. Land and politics in Hawaii will never be separated because they were intertwined in 1893, in 1894, in 1895. Crown lands being the largest example. And all of the other issues we're dealing with today also. But this is dealing with 25% of all of the lands. Yeah? 1894 Constitution, Article 95. That portion of the public domain heretofore known as the Crown Lands is hereby declared to have been heretofore and now to be the property of the Hawaiian government, and to be now free and clear from any trust of or concerning the same from all claims of any nature whatsoever upon the rents, issues, and profits thereof. It shall be subject to alienation and other uses as may be provided by law. All valid leases thereof now in existence are hereby confirmed. That's the flip. Literally. We go from that portion of public domain. When was it ever public domain?
Never.
Never. And this is how important the narrative is. They become the storytellers and they start putting forth stories that have nothing to do with truth, have nothing to do with legality, have to do with storytelling. These lands, there's a reason I made you say private 15 times so that when you read that, you're like, WTF. Right? When public? Never. Second issue. It shall be subject to alienation. Okay? So before 1894, you could not buy the crown lands. Post 1894, introduced here, later made statute law in 1895, the Land Act of 1895. Now all of a sudden you can buy the crown lands. Who's leasing the crown lands?
Sugar.
Who overthrows the country?
Sugar. Hello. So can it be said that we can declare like they did the opposite?
Well, I mean, a declaration is a declaration.
Right.
What? I declare Hawaii is mine.
Yeah.
Is Hawaii mine? No.
Right.
Right? The question I always ask myself, by what authority? Right? If you're in land titles, when you're identifying land titles this way, identification. Then you're asking yourself, once you get to the beginning, then you ask yourself, by what authority is this person conveying to the next person? Does he have authority? Does he own it? Yes. Does he own it? Yes. By what authority? Does he own it? Yes. By what authority? Right? We get caught up with the identification. Oh, there's a deed in the Bureau of Conveyance. Big deal. By what authority did that guy have the right to convey to the next guy? No right to convey, clout on title.
Right.
Right? So you gotta do both ways. Identify, verify. Verify, by what authority did this person sell? By what authority are we making this declaration? The
By the
illegal
brothers.
overthrow.
By the brothers just having whiskey sours and sitting around discussing what they want to do, right?
Hereby, they are hereby declared to have been heretofore and now to be. From this point on, we are going to call them this. Right? From this point on, I hereby declare that these have been heretofore and now are the property of the Hawaiian government. Where's this declaration for the government lands? Why do you feel the need to make a declaration for the crown lands, but not the need to make a declaration for the government lands? Because this is where they're stealing what's not theirs.
Of course.
Yeah. 1910, Lili'u takes this to the U.S. Supreme Court. And you have to keep this in context, right? This is 17 years after. So she's arguing for one bundle of steel. She's been taken over for 17 years. She's been in prison in her palace. It looks like they are here to stay, right? So when she goes to the court, the U.S. court, she's asking for only the one bundle of steel. Hey, where's my right to my $50,000 a year that I used to get for these properties? Yeah? So keep things in context when you read. Although the court sustained the right of dower in the widow of the king, it is clear from the opinion that that the crown lands are treated as private. Under that act, the lands here's the act. Under that land, the acts descend in fee, the inheritance being limited, however, to the successors to the throne as private property. Judge Booth, 1910, this is the U.S. courts. Although the court sustained the right of dower in the widow of the king, it is clear from the opinion that the crown lands are treated not as the king's private property, in the strict sense of the word. They belong to the office and not to the individual. Do you see the language? This is where language is very important. Now we are being very creative and very playful to turn that which was private into public. Well, they weren't the king's property in the strict sense, right? Because you had this limitation on inheritance thing, and you had this inalienability thing. All of that doesn't change private property into public property. That's just a limitation on inheritance. That just means you don't have the full bundle of stakes. That doesn't turn private into public. That just means you got less private property. You got less rights. Huh? They belong to. Okay, they were inherited by, if that's what you mean they belonged to. So you're not 100% lying, right?
Yeah.
So you see, this is where language matters. Yeah? This is where you take this and turn it into this, one sentence at a time, one verb at a time, one little thing at a time. Because what's this guy gonna say? Oh, you know what? You're right. It's yours, Queen. Sorry, this is where all of our military bases are. This is where we're building. You look at all of the military bases. Okay, not all. You look at the majority of military bases in Hawaii. Waimanalo, Delos Air Force Base. Waimanalo, Crown Lands. Schofield Barracks, Waianae-Uka, Waianae, Crown Lands. Kahawiki, Fort Shafter, Crown Lands. You name your military base, it's Crown Lands. Why is it Crown Lands? Because before 1893, they've sold 667,000 acres of all of the good government land. So there isn't a vacant ahupua'a where I can plant the military base on that doesn't have a puleana here or a puleana there. The only lands that are available are the Crown Lands. Why are the Crown Lands available? Because they were made inalienable in 1865, which means from 1865, nobody could have purchased, they had like 2 acres in the middle of that ahupua'a. Can't, they're inalienable, right? So the Crown Lands, because they're the only virgin ahupua'a available, now become, this is what the United States government needs, this is what Sanford Dole needs to do his homesteading programs, and this is what the sugar planters need. Why does sugar need this land? Because they're on it. They're the ones leasing the 900,000 acres of Crown Lands. So they overthrow the government, make the 1894 Constitution that says, I hereby declare these to be government land, and they're also available for sale. 1895, we make the Land Act, now they're available for sale. 1910, when my 30-year lease is up, that started in 1880, now I sell it to myself. That's the story of the Crown Lands. Here we have Star Bulletin, Friday, December 23rd, 1994. History of Crown Lands may determine their future. Judge Samuel King. Anyone know when Samuel King retired? This is in 94. I'm not sure if he's about to retire or if he's... I don't know off the top of my head. But this is Hawaii Supreme Court Judge, Justice Samuel King, writing an editorial. This is an editorial in the Star Bulletin, Friday, December 23rd, 1994. Why is the Hawaii Supreme Court judge writing an editorial in the newspaper? Right? Has something to say, apparently. Let me see.
I mean, in the 50s, right? No, he retired.
So this, right here, is what this says. That's this paragraph here in 1893. In 1893, after the revolutions, the Crown Lands were lumped in with the government lands. This is a judge talking, right? So you have to understand, if a Hawaii Supreme Court judge says, hey, that was illegal, that means a lot more than a private citizen saying, hey, that was illegal, right? For me, this is the same language. This is a judge saying it's illegal. They were lumped in. What does that mean? Lumped in, right? The Crown Lands were lumped in with the government lands, which together became the public lands of the Provisional Government and Republic. Thus, what Kamehameha III had set aside for me and my heirs and successors forever as my property exclusively was transmuted into part of the general land holdings of the government of Hawaii. Transmuted. Lumped in. Transmuted and lumped in means what they did 100 years ago was illegal. Right? So what he says is, in the course of rewriting history and correcting past wrongs as a start, it would not be unjust for the state of Hawaii to transfer whatever is left of the Crown lands, one half to the trustees of the Bernice Pauahi Bishop Estate for the education of the children of Hawaii, and the other half to Queen's Hospital for the, I can't read, da-da-da-da. Why would he say half to Bishop and half to Queen's Hospital?
Because they're part of that group. They're part of the United Church of Christ.
What's the inheritance laws? Not dower. 50-50 who? Half to the widow, half to the father. Widow is Queen Emma. What does Queen Emma's estate become? Queen's Hospital. Half to Kekuanawa. Where does Kekuanawa's estate ultimately inherit? Hawaii. Right? So, Judge King, earlier here, bashes on Judge Robertson's decisions and says, I have no idea what he was doing with the dower thing. That's an anomaly. I don't know, that was wrong part of the decision, even though Kamehameha III acknowledged dower and Kamehameha IV acknowledged dower. Right? So here, he basically says, Kamehameha's death should have enriched the Bishop Estate and Queen's Hospital. So you can clearly see he's trying to right a historical injustice while acknowledging he didn't use these words, but I'm going to say what lumped in and transmuted means is his acknowledgement of an illegality, an illegal act, which is why the state should give whatever's left back. Right?
So is there a statute of limitation for maybe creating a case for a descent to the original twist of words?
I don't know if there's a statute of limitation, but it's a title issue. There's a cloud on title. The state, no issues of sovereignty. The state does not have title to the crown lands. Judge tells us you should give it back. Why? Because they were lumped in and transmuted. Right? So if we just accept the state of Hawaii, the state of Hawaii today does not have title to the crown lands. That's 25% of, it's 1 out of 4 acres in Hawaii. Right? But he's talking what's left. Right? Because how much of that crown lands was purchased? Tons. Tons.
That could be the precedent.
Right? So this right here, huge, 25% of all land in Hawaii does not have clear title because they did an Unpono Act 120 years ago. Don't blame the mailman. I'm just delivering the mail. Right? So this is where we get, in 1895, the crown lands were lumped in and transmuted with the government lands. They were then renamed, called the Public Land Trust. The Public Land Trust was ceded to the United States of America in 1898 when we became the 50th state without a treaty and without proper annexation. And then in 1959, that Public Land Trust was ceded back to the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii doesn't own them in fee, they own them in trust for the benefit of 5 beneficiaries. One of the 5 beneficiaries, according to the 1959 Hawaii State Constitution, is for the betterment of the condition of Native Hawaiians. 1 out of 5 is 20%. This is where you get Hawaiians are owed 20% of the ceded lands revenue. Right? So you can get 20, And that's 1978 Constitutional Convention creates OHA. OHA is created to administer the 20% Cayetano lingo not paying ceded land settlement till today. Right? But all of that for me is smoke and mirrors because you don't own it. If you're going to get me to spend energy talking about should I get 20% of something, you don't own it. I don't want 20% of something you don't own. Give it back to the guy who owns it. Right? So to understand the Crown lands, we've got to take a short look at the fee simple sale of government lands. This takes place through royal patent grants. This was my master's thesis. I looked at every single sale of royal patent grants from number 1 to 3,630. I made an Excel spreadsheet, 3,630 columns, rows long, 15 columns wide. So I can tell you how much land in Puna was sold between 1850 and 1860. How much land was sold between 1870 and 1880. Between 1871 and 1872. You name the breakdown. I can break it down because I've looked at every single, all 3,600 sales of government lands before the overthrow. With that, here we got Thrum's Annual, page 36, land statistics, estimates of area included in all government grants. Here you have approximately 667,000 acres of government land sold before 1893. This is why there's no good government land available in 1893, which is why they have to confiscate the Crown lands, right? You have to keep in mind, let's take a look at something like Hawaii Island. Hawaii Island, today we're driving over bridges to get Amakua Coast, right? When were those bridges built? Not in 1850, 60, 70, or 80, right? So if you're buying land in the 1870s, there is no road for you to drive over for you to get from Hilo to Hamakua in a decent amount of time. You're going around every single valley, you're going up the switchback, down the switchback, because there is no coastal route, and that's true for all of the islands, right? So our perception of what good available land is very different today because we have infrastructure that did not exist back then. Even today, Waimea is an hour drive away from Hilo. Imagine you're on your horse and cart.
1 week.
1 week, right? So good available land, if it takes me 1 week to get my produce from Waimea to Hilo, I'm probably not looking for land that far out, I'm looking for land closer in, right? So that's what I mean when I say all the good government land was sold. All the land where people were and the infrastructure and the habitation was sold by this time. Yes, there were 100,000 acres in the center of Mauna Kea where Pohakuloa is sitting. Sorry, it's a far walk for me. I'm not looking to buy in the center of the island in the 1840, right? So this is all the good government lands sold by that time. Taking a look at government grants in Puna. This red line is the overthrow. Blue is Hawaiian purchases. White is non-Hawaiian purchases. Hawaiians purchased 80% of all acreage, 13,000 out of 16,000 acres in Puna before the overthrow. 80%. After the overthrow, Hawaiians purchased 8%, 2,000 out of 28,000 acres in Puna. This is what I'm talking about. The overthrow is the huli. When Hawaiians are in charge, Hawaiians are buying land. When Hawaiians aren't in charge, now we're trying to get people from America to buy land in homesteading programs. This purchase right here is Ola'a Homestead. If I told you not a single acre of Ola'a was sold before 1893, 1 plus 1 equals 2, what is 1 plus 1? Why was not a single acre of Ola'a sold prior to 1893? Ola'a's crown. Inalienable. Since 1865, you could not have purchased Ola'a. Ola'a is one of Sanford Dole's homesteading programs. With the Crown lands, you have 3 interests. United States of America wants military bases. Sanford Dole wants a homesteading program, and the plantations want to be able to buy the lands that they're leasing because all their 30-year leases are up in 1900, in 1905, in 1910, and they want to be able to buy those lands because now those lands are productive. Sugar is also on the boom, right? The dominant economy in Hawaii until the 1870s is Paniolo, is whaling. The Paniolo supported salted beef. Salted beef was the industry for the whaling ships. Salted beef lasts a lot longer when you're in the Aleutian Islands than a banana or an apple does, right? So they're using salted beef until 1872 when they discover oil in Pennsylvania. Now you got crude oil. Crude oil no longer need whale oil. No longer need whale oil. You don't need cattle. Salted beef for that industry. Now all of a sudden, whaling, cattle on the decline. 1860s, you got the Civil War. North in America fighting the South. Where's all the sugar grown? In the South. North doesn't have access to sugar. Where does the North get its sugar from? Elsewhere. The South ain't selling it to them. We're at war. I'm not going to sell you sugar. Right? So now that's where Hawaii comes in. Now Hawaii becomes, hey, let's supply the North with sugar. Now you get sugar. You get
Cattle going
Cattle.
down, sugar going up.
sugar going up, 1870s, 80s, 90s. We're now in the productive upcycle of sugar. Now I need to buy my lands that I'm leasing. Because if you know I'm making $1 billion, I'm making this number up. If you know I'm making a whole lot of money, now you're going to raise the price. Now you're going to charge me fair market value. Now I'm going to not make as much profits. I want to now own the land I'm on. It's inalienable. Well, 1893, overthrow the government. 1894, those lands that were once government are now private, or were once private are now government. Now we're going to sell it to ourselves. Here we have, belonging to Kamehameha III, Ola'a, Ahukua, Hilo, Hawaii. Ola'a homesteads. Your homesteads before the overthrow were to get people in Hawaii on the land. Your homesteads after the overthrow were to get Americans from America on the land. Yeah? Two different kinds of homesteading programs. The audience for each is very different. Which is different than the 1920 homelands homesteads, right? So not all homesteading programs are equal. Pre-overthrow, the kings are trying to get us guys on the land. Post-overthrow, trying to get Americans from someplace else here. I was driving around Lahaina yesterday and Kihei today and said, wow, they've been pretty effective.
Yeah.
How Maui has changed in the last 20 years. Land Act of 1895. In order to develop a citizenship here that will be always improving in those characteristics which are recognized as the highest attributes of American citizenship, it is essential that the class referred to as Anglo-Saxon should be largely increased, and particularly that it should be increased by the introduction of persons from the mainland who have acquired long residence and particularly by inheritance and position the qualities of citizenship above. Yeah? This is a quote from the Dole collection. This is Dole talking. The reason we need it is to get increase Anglo-Saxons from America. Because in 1850, a Japanese person comes here to work on the plantations, marries, has a child. That child, through birth on the soil, is a Hawaiian national. Hawaiian national has the right to vote. Right to vote. Right to vote. You're going, the whites, Anglo-Saxons. Anglo-Saxons, you have to understand, foreigners, haole in the 1850s means foreigner. Foreigner means not born in Hawaii. Native, born in Hawaii. Foreigner, not born in Hawaii. Native, born in Hawaii. This is why in 1852, Thurston, I forget which one, Asa or Lord, whoever's alive in 1852, second generation or third generation Thurston in Hawaii, claims to be a native Hawaiian in his court case, Thurston vs. Naone. How is Thurston a native Hawaiian? Native, born on the soil, birth on the soil, Hawaiian national. Identity in this time period was one of nationality, not one of ethnicity. Yeah? That might be a very unpopular thing for many of us in the room, but that's the reality. Yeah? We were taught to see the world through race by America. Identity before the 1850s, nationality. Hawaiian was a nationality. As of yet, little had been done in the way of introducing Americans from the mainland to these islands, although the preparation of the Act of 1895 was distinctly made with that object of view. What's the purpose of the Land Act of 1895? To encourage settlement from America. This is Dole talking, not me. I'm not quoting my master's thesis, this is quoting Dole. He tells us the purpose of the Land Act is to encourage immigration from America. Whitewash. When this happens in occupied countries, when Germany is occupying Poland and brings all of its German citizens into Poland in order to offset the vote, it's a war crime. Yeah? Under international law, you cannot flood the occupied country with the citizenry of the occupier. Because then they're going to be the ones who are voting, and then all your laws and all your things are out the door. Yeah? Not trying to incite anything, but because we didn't have a war, because bullets, nobody died in 1893, because it was a peaceful revolution, we missed the fact on these little illegalities that when there was a war, that, no doubt, that's a war crime. Nobody's denying it was a war crime when it happened in Japan's occupation of Korea, in Germany's occupation of Poland, and wherever this kind of thing happened.
Same for the overthrow, yeah, you're saying. War crime.
Government grants, Halilea, Kauai, that's the northern Moku where they got rained out in this last month. We don't have the pre and post, 110 acres sold before, 12 acres sold after. So we don't have that Puna flip, that Puna dynamic. The reason is because Kauai and Maui, we don't have a lot of government lands, right? Kamehameha's Hawaii Island, they're taking mostly Hawaii Island lands. Oahu, they're not taking Maui lands for themselves, not taking Kauai lands for themselves in general. What you do have is the sale of Anahola and Hanalei, which are crown lands. Yeah? You could not have purchased Hanalei had it not been for 1893 overthrow, 1894 Land Act. I hereby declare that that which was once private is now public without the Land Act of 1895, which makes all of this available for sale. In 1904, Albert Wilcox Jr., through Land Patent Grant 4845, the difference between a Land Patent Grant and Royal Patent Grant is Royal Patent Grant, pre-overthrow, Land Patent Grant, post-overthrow. Sanford Dole literally crosses out the royal and writes in the word land. He does that because he's trying to get Hawaii annexed to America. We cannot seem like a monarchy. The United States form of government is a republic. They just revolted against the monarch, against the King of Britain 100 years earlier, Declaration of Independence. They just revolted against, so they're trying to get rid of anything that sounds like monarchy. Cross out royal, that's why you have the word Land Patent Grant. Land Patent Grant 4845 to Albert Wilcox Jr. Albert Wilcox Jr. is the son of Albert Wilcox Sr. Albert Wilcox Jr. Albert Wilcox Sr. dies when Albert Wilcox Jr. when mom is either 6 months pregnant or when he's 6 months old. Albert Wilcox Sr. purchased some of this 110 acres back in the 16 acres back in the 1850s, married a Konahiki. Albert Wilcox Jr. is Hawaiian, ethnic Hawaiian. He's also Hawaiian national because he's born here, but he's ethnic Hawaiian, right? But he's also in that sugar Hawaiian, right? Land Patent 4845 to Albert Wilcox, and in conformity with Section 17 of Part 5 of the Land Act of 1895. All of this was made possible by the Land Act of 1895. I could not have purchased Hanalei had it not been for the Land Act, had it not been for the Constitution of 1894, had it not been for the overthrow of 1893. All of these lands were inalienable, private property of the king. You could not have bought them otherwise. Hawaii's story, Hawaii's queen. She asked a very common sense question in her book. If you haven't read it, Hawaii's story, Hawaii's queen is a roadmap. For those of you interested in this, look here. For those of you interested in this, look here. If this amuses you, look at this. Now, she does it in this very subtle way, but she points you to look at stuff. Look here, for those of you interested in crown lands. Look here, for those of you interested in these things. For 4 years and more now, these people have confiscated and collected the revenues reserved from all time in order that the chief, highest in rank, that is, the reigning sovereign, might care for his poorer people. Never were the revenues of these lands included in government accounts. They comprise 915,000 acres out of a total extent of 4 million, or about 1/4, and yield an income of about $50,000 a year. They are by legislative act and rulings of the Supreme Court my own property at this day. But notwithstanding this, the doctrine that might makes right seems to prevail. And not content with depriving me of my income and employing it to forward their own schemes, the present government is now striving to cede these lands, which they do not own and never have owned, to the United States. If you want to prove, if someone wants to prove that these are government lands, then go to the government treasury and show me since 1848 where the government treasury is collecting $15,000 a year from this 915,000 acres. Because if the government's getting $50,000 a year, there should be an accounting of it in the government treasury. Very easy to, hey, this is government. We've been getting 50 grand for the last 50 years. You show me that and I'll be like, oh, okay, maybe these are public. Not going to find it. Yeah? There is no government accounting because they weren't government, they were private. But somebody go and prove me wrong. Go find it. This is what I mean by these little nugget sheets. Yeah? Hey, if you say this was yours, show me the receipt. Where did you deposit $50,000 a year for 50 years? You should have a receipt, right? No receipt. Evidence. Supporting private property. In Privy Council, King Kamehameha III, what lands would be respected? Kamehameha III, Queen Kalama dower. Kamehameha IV, acknowledge Queen Kalama's dower. Queen Emma relinquished her right to dower when Kamehameha IV sold lands. 1864 court case. Keeping in mind, this is the Supreme Court judge, the interpreter of interpreters. He's not an academic, he's the Hawaii Supreme Court judge. The interpreter of law in the highest court of the kingdom said these are private lands inheritable to the crown. My opinion doesn't matter in relation to his because he's a Hawaii Supreme Court judge. I'm not. No one in this room is a Hawaii Supreme Court judge. If we're looking to any authority, we shouldn't be looking to Jinen. He's only one of us. He's not the Supreme Court judge either. We should be looking to G.M. Robertson. What did he say? Private. Kamehameha deeds in the Bureau of Conveyance, not sold as royal patent grants. No records of proceeds going to the government treasury. The only evidence for government property is it belongs to the crown. 1910, right? Did you see any other evidence that said this is government property? Maybe I'm cherry picking and there's a whole ton of it and I didn't show it to you. Right? So go find it and then we'll look at it and we'll have this conversation again. I haven't found any. I'm not cherry picking. I'm not showing you what I want to show you. I'm showing you according to the authority. All of these things are talked about in this court case. Yeah? This is what he looked at to come at with his decision. And he cites all of that in his court case. Problem is, we don't read anymore. We read what somebody said about his court case, but we don't read the court case itself. Read the court case itself, it says all of these things. Read what Spaulding in 1930 said about the court case. Read what Booth said about the court case. Very different story. They're trying to rationalize an illegality rather than describe what is. Questions?